The lecture chamber pulsed with anticipation, its curved walls alive with shifting constellations. Students from 20 systems sat rigid, their eyes fixed on Professor Drazil Venn as he activated the quantum restraint prism at the center dais. Within seconds, a shadow formed a beast whispered to dismantle tanks and silence platoons. The Gorath Hound. Breathless murmurs spread, tension crackled, and then Callan Ward, Earth's lone exchange student, leaned back in his chair, tore open a snack pouch, and whistled. "Hey, puppy," he said casually, as if addressing a neighbor's dog. The galaxy stopped breathing. The lecture chamber thrummed like a colossal engine caught between sleep and fury, its living glass roof folding distant constellations into a trembling mosaic, while the metallic ribs tasted faintly of ozone and old coffee. So every student felt the place as a thing with memory. Rows of attendees from 20 systems formed impossible geometries, crystalline limbs tucked, bioluminescent pupils pinpricked, respirators whispering, each silhouette an unfamiliar dialect, and all of them faced the central dais where Professor Drazil Venn stood like weather with manners, his coat of ceremonial plates silvering under the prism's first note. He moved with a practiced gravity, a flick of a gauntlet calling the quantum restraint prism to bloom in bands of cold blue, while null grav chains sang high in silver. Technicians murmured into holopads, and the monitors painted tidy numbers into the air. Integrity, coherence, tether load. Nature, somewhere in the third arc of seats, a human named Callan Ward sat with an elbow on his knee, thumb rubbing a small brass token from a place called Earth, and he grinned like someone told him a secret. In his face there was an ordinary steadiness that read oddly among alien awe, a quiet like someone who had grown used to noise and still preferred conversation. The professor's voice cut across the hum, clipped and theatrical. Today we will observe apex adaptation and containment response. Watch how theory meets danger. The narrator could say, and perhaps would later, that whatever they recorded on the holo this day would be cross-referenced for centuries, which is a way of noting that reputations had just arrived at a hinge. The micro-hook rested in Drazil's quiet final syllable. Observe closely. Callan Ward did not sit like a guest at history's table. He sprawled with the ease of someone in a roadside diner, elbow loose, one boot tucked behind the other, turning that small brass token from Earth between his fingers, as if it were both lucky charm and private puzzle. Around him, whispers collected like static, soft and cautious, translated through hushed devices. Class 12 Deathworld, one student murmured. Crucible planet, another hissed. Anomaly, warned a third. To most of them, Earth was a cautionary entry in galactic taxonomy, a place where storms chewed through cities and jungles, armed themselves with venomous patience. Yet this human wore a half-smile that refused to be erased. Beside him, Lyranethesk shifted on crystalline haunches, nervous light rippling through facets that betrayed both awe and suspicion. Vorik Nal, armored in scales and tradition, tapped his gauntlet against his thigh in the rhythm of a warrior who mistrusted laughter in solemn halls. Even the air seemed to bend around the human, ordinary posture in extraordinary context, an oddity wrapped in soft fabric instead of armor. Callan bit into a snack cube that crumbled noisily in the hush, muttering with exaggerated disgust. Still better than the cafeteria's bitter brew? And that small line tumbled across species as if it were a riddle they couldn't parse. What unsettled them most was not his levity, but his calm, as if the atmosphere designed to inspire reverence was, for him, just another room. His eyes kept drifting back to the center dais, watching the prism with a focus that wasn't fear, but something harder to place, like recognition, or the anticipation of a curtain about to rise. The open loop lingered in that glance, promising that the human expected something everyone else dreaded. Professor Drazil Venn raised his gauntlet and the prism brightened, the chamber's lights dimming until every student's reflection bent in its surface. His voice carried like iron dust across steel. Today's lesson is not theory, it is exposure. We will study the behavior of apex predators under restraint and calculate what survival demands of us. Hollow monitors flared alive, spooling clean digits into the air. Field integrity 100%, chain load optimal, resonance aligned, and the numbers flickered in sequence like a countdown nobody wanted to see finish. The null-grav chains trembled in silver arcs, taut across nothingness, while assistants scribbled real-time equations to predict possible failure points. A rustle passed through the chamber. 1,000 tiny shifts. Respirators clicked faster. Crystalline students dimmed their glow. Reptilian tails twitched against seats. More than one remembered the archive stories. Previous demonstrations that ended with sealed reports and casualty statistics nobody volunteered to discuss. The professor let that silence work for him. He paused just long enough for every pupil to feel the weight of what he hadn't said. Callan Ward popped another snack cube into his mouth, chewing slowly, gaze still fixed on the prism like he'd seen a trick performed before and wanted to know if this magician was any good. Exposure therapy, he muttered with a grin, crumbs flecking his sleeve, and his tone carried casualness where others heard dread. Around him, whispers turned into questions. Was the human reckless, or did he know something they didn't? The prism thrummed in warning, deeper than before, a bass note that made ribs hum and hollow lines quiver. Drazil extended one hand toward the field as though conducting an orchestra, his final instruction clipped sharp enough to cut. "Hold steady," and the micro-hook trembled in the pause that followed, because steady felt like a word about to collapse. The prism convulsed once, a ripple tearing across its surface like heat mirage, and then the shadow inside condensed into a form that pulled every sound from the chamber. First came the outline, massive shoulders, plated ridges that curved like iron thorns, legs coiled in predatory patience. Then the details sharpened, hide the color of scorched obsidian, jaws ridged with serrated teeth meant less for eating than dismantling, and eyes that shone glass black with a patience that had ended armies. The Gorath hound exhaled, and the sound vibrated the benches as though the hall itself had a heartbeat. Gas broke discipline. Lorraine dimmed to a pale glow, every facet quivering as if light itself feared being noticed. Vorik's scales clattered faintly, his throat pouch swelling with a warning growl he hadn't meant to make. Even the professor's assistants faltered, styluses freezing midair, as the reputation of this beast outweighed the safety percentages printed on their holoscreens. Drazil Ven's tone tried to recapture order. He named the predator, recited its history in clipped syllables. Skirmishes lost, battalions shredded, tanks reduced to ornaments in the mud. Perfect lethality, he said, and the words landed like a verdict. Yet among the collective terror, one detail bent the script. The beast's gaze swept the chamber, dismissing rows of quivering silhouettes, until it halted and fixed itself upon the lone human in the third arc of seats. Callan didn't flinch. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, snack still in hand, as if he were studying the entrance of a stage performer rather than an apex nightmare. The chamber seemed to tilt toward that silent exchange, the predator watching the human watching back. And in that tension, the micro-hook glinted. Awareness had chosen its target, and it wasn't the chains. The prism whined as though its seams were teeth grinding, arcs of blue light cracking against the null-grav chains that strained to hold shape. On the monitors, numbers tumbled in a cruel rhythm. Integrity, 88%, 74%, 62%. Each drop a drumbeat that pushed students deeper into dread. Technicians snapped commands at one another, hands darting over hollow controls. But their precision looked small against the immensity pacing inside the field. A sharp fissure spider-webbed across one restraint plate, and the sound it made resembled bone under pressure. Liren pressed both crystalline palms against her chest, facets flickering from panic to pallor, while Vorik hissed in frustration and clutched at the hilt of a training blade he wasn't supposed to bring. The chamber had become a choir of shallow breaths, every species aware of the metrics sliding toward failure, yet nobody daring to leave their seat under Drazil's strict glare. The professor's voice snapped like wire. "Observe, do not intervene. This is controlled." The words didn't sound convincing, even to him. And then there was Callan Ward, tearing open the edge of another snack pouch with the easy patience of someone at a roadside picnic. The crinkle of the wrapper was an insult to the alarms, a tiny rebellion against the red strobes now pulsing on every panel. He popped one cube into his mouth, chewed noisily, and tilted his head at the monstrous shadow as if sharing a private joke. It wasn't bravery exactly. It was ordinariness sharpened until it looked like defiance. The prism stuttered again, power dipping into amber, a hollow warning tone rattling every rib of the hall. One final number blinked in red. Integrity, 48%. The micro-hook lay in that blink, daring every witness to imagine what happened when the last digit fell. Callan rose without hurry, the movement so ordinary it jarred in a hall braced for catastrophe. He brushed crumbs from his palm, straightened his jacket, and strolled toward the humming barrier, as though it were nothing more than a window display. The beast tracked him, head tilting, pupils narrowing with an interest that sent half the students clutching at their armrests. Even Drazil Venn, whose entire career had been built on cataloging predators, found his throat dry as he raised a hand halfway in protest, but could not summon the command. The snack pouch rustled as Callan reached inside and pinched a single cube between thumb and forefinger. He lifted it toward the beast like someone greeting a neighbor's dog, voice casual, words absurdly simple. "Hey there." The syllables landed soft, human, without the formal cadence of academy speech. The Goroth hound leaned forward, nostrils flaring, and for a heartbeat, every soul in the room imagined those jaws closing around Callan's arm. Instead, the predator inhaled, paused, and plucked the cube from his fingers with a precision that mocked its reputation. A sound like a sigh moved through the hall. Lirain's facets brightened in disbelief. Vorik froze with his claws half unsheathed, and the assistant's staluses hung midair as though the very act of recording might disturb the impossible. Callan smiled, wiped his hand on his trousers, and said in the same tone one might use for a household pet, "Good puppy." The beast lowered its head, chewing slowly, posture easing into something closer to waiting than striking. A ripple of confusion swept the class, half horror, half awe. Professor Drazil whispered a single fractured syllable. "How?" And the micro-hook pulsed in that unfinished question, demanding an answer that none of their data could provide. No, voices cracked open the silence at once, a dozen species talking over one another until the chamber sounded like a market at panic. "Reinforce the field," shouted one. "Terminate the session," shrieked another. Lorraine's crystalline body pulsed erratically as she stammered about protocol violations, her glow dimming until it was nearly colorless. Vorik surged to his feet, scales clattering like an armored drum, accusing Callan of reckless stupidity, his pride refusing to accept that a snack could succeed where military firepower had failed. The noise rose high enough that even the prism's alarms seemed like background static. Professor Drazil Venn cut through with a single command, his voice measured but edged with disbelief. "Hold your positions." His eyes, however, betrayed calculation, curiosity sharpening through the cracks of his authority. He had expected terror, maybe carnage, not compliance bought with crumbs. His stylus trembled in his gauntlet as he scrawled theories no text had prepared him for. "Is this scent? Conditioning? Some form of neural mimicry?" he muttered, half to himself, half to history. Meanwhile, Callan crouched beside the towering predator as if crouching beside a campfire. He scratched behind its ridged ear plate with calm persistence, oblivious to the chorus of panic. The Goroth hound leaned into the touch, posture slackening, breath vibrating in a low rumble that shook benches yet carried no threat. Callan's grin widened. "Told you." "Puppy." The contradiction staggered the class. Fear and fascination collided, leaving no room for certainty, and through it all, the crimson status bar on the monitors pulsed steadily, integrity still sliding, alarms still counting down, danger not gone but simply paused. The micro-hook hung in that discord, a predator soothed, but a system still failing. The prism finally gave way with a sound like glass snapping underwater, shards of light bursting outward before dissolving into nothing. The null-grav chain sagged and then tore free, links disintegrating into sparks that scattered across the dais. For a moment, the beast stood completely unbound, every muscle ridged with potential violence, and the chamber erupted into chaos. Students vaulted over benches, respirators hissed in panic, and holopads clattered against the floor in a rain of desperate noise. One technician screamed into a comms line before vanishing under the press of bodies. Yet the Gorath hound did not lunge. It did not savage, nor charge, nor shred. It simply lowered onto its haunches beside Callan Ward, nostrils flaring once as if confirming something private, then settled into a steady watchfulness. Its tail, lined with spines sharp enough to shear alloy, gave a slow wag that clinked faintly against the floor. The dissonance rattled harder than the alarms. Unbound, it chose stillness. Professor Drazil stood frozen, torn between calling security drones and reaching for his stylus. His mind screamed protocol, yet his eyes drank in anomaly. Students peeked from behind overturned seats, unable to reconcile training with reality. Lyraine's glow flickered with confusion. Vorik's claws clenched helplessly, pride bleeding into disbelief. Then a metallic click echoed from the far wall as the secondary safety grid armed, a last resort mechanism primed to release neural disruptors if the beast made a move. Red text flashed overhead. Secondary hold at 17%. The number wasn't reassurance. It was a countdown dressed as hope. And in that fragile balance, the microhook gleamed. The most dangerous creature in the room wasn't moving because a human with snacks had already claimed its attention. Professor Drazil Venn stepped forward, robes brushing the scorched floor, his expression caught between fury and revelation. His career had been built on cataloging Deathworld predators, on writing protocols that assumed monsters could never be tamed, only contained. Yet here was evidence cracking those foundations wide open. He spoke aloud like a man dictating to the archives. Subject exhibits altered response when presented with human stimulus, possible imprinting, possible behavioral override, further observation required. Each phrase sounded brittle, as if spoken to buy time while his mind tried to redraw maps. Callan didn't look up from the beast at his side. He rubbed a ridge on its snout with casual pressure, the way a farmer might rub a mule's nose after a day in the fields. "Not that complicated," he said, his tone light. "Back home you feed strays, they start to trust you." His words landed like heresy. Feeding strays was not in any textbook of xenobiology, but the evidence chewed calmly beside him, spines flexing with satisfaction. Around them the students whispered fragments: conditioning, chemical signaling, pheromone resonance. Yet none of those guesses explained why the predator's gaze softened only when fixed on Callan. Lyraine's glow faltered with awe. Vorik muttered curses in disbelief, and the technicians kept their pens moving only because it felt safer than thinking. Drazil's eyes narrowed, his curiosity now outweighing any sense of decorum. He lowered his gauntlet, voice softer, almost reverent. "If behavior can rewrite biology, then everything we thought immutable was never truth at all." The sentence trailed off, jagged with wonder. The micro-hook hung in the air like a live wire. If this was possible with one beast, what else might bend before the simplest act of human ordinariness? Callan shifted onto one knee, palm out, voice calm and steady as he whispered another wordless hum. The Gorath hound tilted its massive head, nostrils widening, then leaned into his hand with the patience of something domesticated rather than designed for slaughter. He tapped 2 fingers against the floor, and the beast responded with a deliberate step forward, claws clicking softly, each movement careful enough to seem rehearsed. It was not obedience in the trained sense. It was recognition, a predator mirroring trust it had been offered. Students craned forward from behind cover, disbelief painting their faces in alien hues. Lyraine blinked in fractal patterns, unable to comprehend simplicity, working where centuries of weapons had failed. Vorik, pride bruised to rawness, finally gathered courage to test the moment. He approached cautiously, gauntlet extended, chest trembling beneath his scales. The hound rumbled low, a warning that rattled the benches like a quake. Vorik froze, Then Callan murmured, "Easy, puppy," with a smile that belonged in a sunlit yard, and the rumble faded to silence. The beast stepped back, pressing its armored flank against the human's leg, as if confirming loyalty. The sound it made next unsettled everyone. A vibration deep enough to shiver through the bones, mistaken first for a growl until someone realized it was closer to a purr. The resonance rattled the seats, but its rhythm was soft, almost content. Students stared, half convinced they'd hallucinated. Professor Drizzle's pen skated across his pad, notes spilling faster than his breath could keep pace, each word a future paper. The class exhaled collectively, yet the awe did not soothe. It stoked new questions, and the micro-hook burned in the air. If a hound could be calmed, what would happen if humanity ever called something larger a friend? Order returned in fragments, like broken glass pieced back into shape, but never whole. Emergency beacons dimmed, technicians regained their voices, and the council's first remote queries blinked into the hall as scrolling directives demanding containment reports. Professor Drizzle then delivered statements with formal precision. Yet behind every clipped phrase, his mind burned with data too wild to fit regulation. He described what had happened as anomalous behavior, but his eyes betrayed something larger. The recognition of a discovery that could reorder every textbook stacked in the archives. His stylus scratched harder, notes pouring as if to cage the truth before it escaped. Meanwhile, students whispered in frantic clusters. Liron replayed the moment in crystal memory, glow flickering with awe. Vorik sat rigid, torn between humiliation and a reluctant respect. A shaky clip already circulated on private feeds, tagged with a headline bold enough to ignite rumor. Human tames Deathworld hound. Within minutes it spread beyond the academy, and by nightfall half the quadrant would be watching the footage in disbelief. Callan wiped crumbs from his sleeve and leaned back against the dais as though the demonstration had ended hours ago. "So, when's lunch?" he asked dryly, tones slicing through tension like a blade dulled by humor. His casualness unsettled them more than the beast itself. It suggested control wasn't luck, but something inherent, repeatable, terrifying in its simplicity. Professor Drizzle's official closing remarks stressed caution and further study. But the subtext was obvious to every listener. A door had opened, and none of them could close it again. The micro-hook glowed inside that unspoken truth. Policy would shift, doctrines would fracture, and humanity had just proven it carried tools the galaxy did not understand. In the days that followed, the Academy rearranged itself around an uninvited celebrity. The Gorath hound, already christened Puppy by gleeful gossip, padded behind Callan Ward through courtyards where alien saplings bent under foreign winds. Security officers walked wider arcs, pretending vigilance while hiding their nerves. And cafeteria staff posted a polite notice. "Please do not feed the apex predator." The beast ignored most of the campus, but stayed close to Callan, protective as a shadow stitched to his heels. Students filmed its every step, their disbelief colliding with fascination, until it became daily spectacle. Professor Drizzle then compiled his report with lines that wavered between academic detachment and awe. "Observed human-mediated modulation of predatory response," the heading read, but the subtext pulsed louder, an event rewriting the grammar of survival. Council officials dispatch envoys, military strategists schedule briefings, and whispers of new doctrine spilled into corridors once reserved for theory alone. For the first time in decades, the Academy was not merely a place of study, but the epicenter of policy. Callan remained the least changed by the storm. He yawned in lectures, swapped jokes with classmates, and continued eating the same cheap snack cubes that had begun the story. When asked by a reporter how he had accomplished the impossible, his reply was painfully ordinary. Fed it, spoke kind, stayed calm. That answer unsettled commanders more than any demonstration could have. One evening, under fading starlight filtered through the Academy's glass ribs, a student asked if Puppy understood commands. Callan grinned, tapped his leg, and said clearly, "Sit, Puppy." The beast obeyed with a heavy thud, spine settling against the stone. The silence that followed was thicker than applause, and the micro-hook lingered. The galaxy had noticed. and it would never look at humans the same way again.